for those of you who know my cousin Jiwon, he's here. He's a missionary in Palestine. His wife is trying to give birth. So he's here until that happens. But yes, good to see a lot of familiar faces. Good to see some newer faces that have been coming out. And yeah, we're just happy to be together. So this is actually the chapter that was, for Hebrews. The main reason why I chose this book was because I was really excited about chapter 11. For most of you who know Hebrews, like chapter 11 is like the chapter. You're like, this is it, and this is really in line with our theme for the year of being transformers. So I really wanted to choose or get to this chapter because it's showing people living lives of faith, people living lives as agents of transformation and change. So as I mentioned before, we're actually going to go over this chapter twice. So we're going to go over it this week, and we're going to go over what's in the text, but then I want to go over it again and just bring some more, I guess, more modern or somewhat more relevant models of faith for us to really just dwell upon and be encouraged by those that have walked the walk before us. Now, a reminder, next Sunday we will not be meeting here. Next Sunday is the joint service, and we're not meeting here at 1 either. So if you come here at 1 o'clock next Sunday, you will find a locked room with the lights off. Because we'll be at the main church, and we're joining the 12 p.m. service, but we actually need to get there early because it gets very packed, so we'll probably be there around 11:40, and we'll try to sit together. But just remember that next week is joint service. And then the week after that, we will revisit this chapter, and so on and so forth. So, to start off today, this is the chapter on faith. So, what is faith? When you hear this word faith, what do you think? What is it? Faith. Tommy's raising his hand. Trust. Okay, good.
Struggle.
Struggle. All right. Faith is a struggle. Okay. What else? I thought everyone was giving one-word answers.
Believing without seeing.
Oh, someone looked at the text. Believing without seeing. Good. Good. What else?
Opposite word of fear.
Opposite word of fear. Okay. Interesting. The antonym of fear. Okay. Anything else? Now, I'm going to date myself by showing this picture, but I'm from the era where this song was popular. George Michael. Some of you probably have no idea who George Michael is.
I know.
Some of you know, I know Koreans really like the song, Last Christmas, that Wham sang. That was the group he was in before he went solo. This song was really popular when I was a kid. It came out in '87, so some of you weren't even born, so yeah, I know. And I remember this particularly because my sisters visited Korea in '88. I came in '89. They visited Korea in '88. They were on some weird high school exchange program where all this drama happened with all these high school kids from America visiting Korea. But one of my memories was they brought back bootleg copies of this song. So it's like George Michael, the Korean version. But regardless, for me, I'm from the era that when we hear the word faith, this song automatically comes into our head. Because I gotta have faith. Anyway. Let's get into the text. All right, Hebrews 11, starting from verse 1. Open your Bible, smartphones, or look at the screen. Hebrews 11. It's a long passage, so stay with me, but it's a great passage too. So just, really just sit in what the Word of God has to say. Okay, from verse 1, the Word of God says this. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, When warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteous, that is, in keeping with faith. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were looking or longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead, or from death. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what more shall I say? I do not have that time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There are others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. These were all commended for the faith. Yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. Amen. Long passage. There's a lot in there. I'm going to try to touch upon as many of them as I can, because I really want us to understand what this passage is really trying to tell us. And so we've been going through this book of Hebrews, and like I said, chapter 11 was the main reason why I wanted to get into Hebrews, because we're in the theme of transformers, right? Knowing that the gospel is transforming us, it changes us, and knowing that God desires us to be agents of change to others. And here in chapter 11, we have many, many examples of people who live by faith, many, many examples of people who were transformers in their time. And so I want us to really dwell on what these people did and how God used them, so that we can be encouraged to be used likewise. And so, we've been going through the book of Hebrews, and it's been this long argument up until the last chapter of chapter 10. And it's been building, and showing us who Jesus is. Right? The author was very clearly trying to make sure that the people reading this letter would know Jesus. They would not see him as someone lesser than an angel, or someone lesser than some of these heroes of faith like Abraham or Moses, but that they would know that he is a son of God. And as son of God, he was our priest. And as this amazing priest from the order of Melchizedek, like none before him, gave a sacrifice once and for all that brought us into relationship with God, as we saw last week. And we saw that now that we're in this intimate place with God, and now that we have this hope in the promises that he has given us, the challenge was to stir each other up, to be in community, and to encourage each other to do good things. And from that place to not only encourage each other, but to stay away from sin and to persevere. And it ends on that note of let's persevere together. And it goes into, this is what faith is. This verse 1 is often used as the definition of faith. When people ask what is faith, they say Hebrews 11 verse 1. And they'll read, now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. Mallory gave a very good paraphrase of that. Right? This is faith. Now, for many of us, especially for those of us that are maybe more analytical, we would look at this and be like, what? Like, I need empirical evidence. What is this? And so this is what faith is. It's just dwelling in the hope of knowing that God keeps his promise. Even though we cannot see him, even though, as in the case in many of these people's lives, they never actually got to see those promises fulfilled. This is faith, living as if those promises will be kept. Living as if God will always keep his word. Now, it starts off immediately, and it starts off with creation, and it gives this account of God basically speaking the world into existence. I think the nerdy term for this is what? Ex nihilo. God spoke creation through his word. And so I don't want to get too much into this, but I'm an engineer, but I believe in creation. Right? I know there are many believers that will believe in theistic evolution, that God used evolution to create the world. Okay, that's fine. The Pope agrees with you, sure. but for me, like, I will side with what Scripture shows. And to me, that's also what Hebrews 11 focuses on, that God created the world out of nothing through his word, through his power. Right? And immediately the author starts with, this is the starting point of faith, creation itself. It continues and goes into the two brothers, Cain and Abel. It talks about the story. I remember when I was like when I learned this as a Sunday school kid, I was confused because Cain was giving meat and Abel was giving like fruits and vegetables. I'm like, what? What kind of sacrifice is that? I was like, doesn't God want meat? But it wasn't really about the sacrifice. It was about the heart and attitude of the person giving that sacrifice. And even the passage itself says Abel was commended as righteous. It was much less about the sacrifice, but about Abel himself. And so we're shown that Abel gave those sacrifices and it was commended as righteous as an act of faith. And it continues with the interesting character of Enoch. Aside from Enoch, who are the two characters that went straight to heaven? Elijah. Oh, you got some Sunday school kids. All right, cool. So Enoch was the first. And so all we know about Enoch was that he was really cool with God. God really liked Enoch. So much so he's like, you know what, why don't you come on up? And so this was back in the era where everyone lived like crazy, Methuselah was like almost 1,000 years. So you have like these people that like live long lives, and Enoch was something like only like 200 or 300 years. Here's a real short timer because God says, come on up. But that's what we know. We know that this is a man that pleased God. And the passage says you can't please God unless you have faith. Unless you have faith in who he is. And this is what we know. Noah. I wrote up to 100 years because that's how long it took him to build that ark. We don't know exactly how long it is, but it's between, it's definitely not 0, but it's within a 100-year period that he built the ark. Because I think he was 500 when God gave him the command, and I think he was 600 by the time he entered the ark. So it took him, somewhere around that time, up to 100 years. That's a long time. Now, granted, if you actually study in the text the dimensions of the ark, yeah, it would take a long time. Especially if you're doing it by yourself. Maybe he got his sons to help, I don't know. I'm pretty sure he got his sons to help. But it took him a long time. And this isn't a time when rain didn't exist. Right? Like, you really had no use for a boat. And so people were probably just wondering, what is this thing that you're making? I don't even understand. He's building it on dry land. So like, what are you going to do? You're going to move it later? And so this is what he went through. He had to suffer through decades and decades of people mocking him for what he was doing. Now, when you study the text also, you know that the time of Noah was about 1,800 years of just mass sin. Right? So much so that God's like, okay, we need to reset. Like this. All right, this is like creation is messed up because of sin. I need to start over again. And this is the era that Noah lived in. He lived in a period of just mass sin. And yet the thing he had to do, it took a long time. Right? It took him up to 100 years to build this ark. While everyone is making fun of him the whole time. These are the lives that were being shown of faith. Abraham. I call him the father of faith because when you look at Genesis 15:6, that's the first time the word believe shows up in the Bible. It says, Abraham believed and God credited it to him as righteousness. Right? He believed that God was going to keep his promise to him. So many people look at Abraham as the first that the Bible actually recognized, showed faith. So they call him the father of faith. Now, who is Abraham? Abraham basically is the first Wegogian of the Bible. God commanded him to go and leave his homeland, leave his people, and to go into foreign places. And his whole life, it even says in the passage, this guy's rolling up in tents his whole life. Now some of you probably like camping. I don't like camping. I don't mind sleeping in a sleeping bag if I'm on a wood floor, okay? But sleeping on a sleeping bag on this uneven ground is not comfortable. And so I remember, maybe it's because one of my only real camping experiences was pretty awful. It was actually my senior year in high school. We have senior week, and I'm from Maryland, and so we go to, whenever we have breaks, we go to this place called Ocean City. It's this really dirty ocean, or dirty beach, right? And so, senior week, we all go there. And I remember, most people rent out, hotels or motels and stuff like that. We wanted to save money. And my friend was more of an outdoors guy, so he's like, okay, guys, we're gonna sleep in a tent for the whole week. And so we set up the tent, and it's right by the ocean, right? And it was this crazy storm. And I remember while we were trying to sleep, all of a sudden the tent collapsed and it's on top of us. And so I remember that night, instead of sleeping in that tent, me and my actually there were 2 tents. One of them collapsed, the other stayed up. The one I was in collapsed. And so we it was raining too, so we're we don't want to deal with this. So me and my friend, we went into his car, we turned it on, and we just chilled in his car. I think we fell asleep too, all night. So much so that he ran out of gas. And then the next day we went to a motel. That was my main camping experience. Anyway, Abraham, he lived in tents his whole life. He was a nomad. He was wandering. God gave him a promise, not only of land, but of a son. And most of his life he was waiting for that to happen. You guys know how old Abraham was when he had Isaac? It's about 100 years old. How old was Sarah? Because it talk like I love how the passage says like it describes Abraham as like and one as good as dead. I mean, he's 100 years old, so I can understand. You know, that's an accurate description, even though he lived much longer. It's like as good as dead. But how old was Sarah when she gave birth to Isaac? She's 90, right? Think about that. Ain't nobody in this room close to 90. Think about a 90-year-old grandma. You know, like your wife's pregnant right now. Think about if she's 90 and she's pregnant. That's crazy. And that's what happened, right? Now, how long did Abraham wait for this? How long did he wait from the moment God first gave him that promise? It's 25 years. 25 years before Abraham finally received that son that God had promised. Now, there's 2 times in Scripture where Abraham, you know, he kind of decides, well, maybe he's not going to give me a son, but he's going to give me something like a son. So the first time is, he's like, well, I have this servant, Eliezer, he's like a son to me, so, you know, I'll make him my heir. I was like, no, it's not Eliezer. And then, you know, his wife comes up with a brilliant idea, like, hey, you know, it's okay for you to have a son through you know, one of my maids, right? So he gets Hagar. What a horrible name, Hagar. And you know, like, that's where they have Ishmael, the son, right? And God's like, no, this isn't it either. And so 2 times Abraham thinks that God is doing it another way, but God still fulfills a promise that he originally gave to him. But it took 25 years. 25 years. You guys shouldn't start catching the theme that faith takes time. Now, I love how in the middle of this chapter, the author kind of gives a very good summary of really the faith of these people when it says, from verse 13, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. You know, in our retreat last weekend, there's a ministry called Sojourn. You guys might have met some of them. It's a ministry from Incheon. That's where they get the name Sojourn from. The concept of, as Christians, as believers, the moment that we accept God, we are no longer from this world. As this passage talks about, we are aliens and strangers, and we are from a different and better country, and instead, we are longing for that country. And so the way I like to put it is, we're resident aliens, right? We are green card holders, brothers and sisters. That is who we are. The moment we accept Christ, the moment we come into relationship with God, we are no longer of this earth. Yes, we live here, but we long to go back home, right? Now, growing up in America, you know, honestly, the longer I've been away from America and the more I've embraced my Korean culture, which I didn't when I was younger, I realized how much of a jerk me and all the other Korean Americans were. For those of you that have ever been like 유학생s and stuff in America, I apologize on behalf of Korean Americans. We're messed up. You know, we always love to call people that were more Korean fobs, right? You know, there's even that show Fresh Off the Boat right now that's kind of showing that lifestyle. And you know, people would say, you know, it shouldn't be boat because we don't ride boats anymore. It should be fresh off the pengi. But anyway, fobs. I used that term all the time when I was younger, and it was a very kind of derogatory term. Like you would look like whenever you said that word, like when you were describing someone, you were not saying it in a nice way. You're like, oh, it's so fobby. And basically, you're just pointing out to someone that they were being more quote unquote Korean. But one of the things that I realized was that people that were from, like, you know, people that came as exchange students, people that had grown up in Korea and came to America later in life, you always knew that they were from another country. right? It's something that they couldn't hide. Whether it's the language, whether it's parts of their mannerisms, their culture, their clothes, all these different things, their very existence screamed out to everybody in that country, I'm not from here, right? And for me, as a Korean American, I kind of give that vibe off. People often know immediately that I'm not Korean, or that I'm from America when they look at me. They look at my clothes, they look at my demeanor, and they say like, oh. And I try to speak Korean to them, and they're like, oh, nice try. We're like, hey, your Korean's not that bad. And so, brothers and sisters, as I've come to learn this, and as I live now as a resident alien here in Korea, I think almost everybody in this room has this experience now, whether you're doing it right now or whether you've done it in the past. When you're from somewhere else, everyone knows. And I think the challenge here in Hebrews 11 is everyone that this passage talks about, they stuck out. Right? Noah stuck out to everybody around him. Abraham stuck out. He's wandering around. All these people stuck out because they were living as if they didn't belong. And part of the challenge as we look at these different models of faith is to live lives where it's visibly evident that we aren't from here. That's part of the challenge. Because if it looks like we're from here, then we're actually doing a bad job. So I'll touch upon this again later, but part of the challenge of living lives of faith is to remember where we're truly from. And so if someone points at you and be like, you're so fobby in this context, it's a compliment. So the passage continues, and it talks about how the author of Hebrews actually supposes Abraham may have believed in resurrection. Right? So when Abraham takes Isaac, and if you look at Genesis 22, where this passage happens, where Abraham is tested, and he takes his son, it keeps saying again and again, his one and only son. Right? God asked him, sacrifice your son. And he goes for 3 days, climbing up Mount Moriah, and brings his son down. And a lot of people wonder, how could Abraham do this? And you look at the passage, and it even talks about how Abraham says, like, we will go up and we will return. We will go up and worship and we will return. And so there's statements in there where it seems like Abraham must have believed something. Either that, or he just didn't want people to know he was about to kill his son. And so what the author says is, he must have believed in resurrection. He must have believed that even if he had to kill his son, God would bring him back. Because God is a God of promise. And so, again, another challenge of what faith means. And the passage continues, touches very briefly on Isaac and Jacob. I'll touch just briefly. If you look at the blessings that they give over their sons, it's very interesting that the blessings really forecast the lives that they live. And not only their own lives, but like every descendant of them from that point on. So I'll be honest, when I was doing a series on my forefathers, some of them, I don't really know how good their relationship with God. Especially Isaac. Isaac, I'm really not sure. He just seemed real messed up, because like I said, his dad almost killed him. So I think that really messed up with his head. They call it the binding of Isaac, right? And so you look at these guys and you're like, man, I don't know if they really know God that well. But even so, the blessings they give to their children, it's like that locks their futures. Really interesting. Now you go to Moses. Moses is a key figure, and Moses, right? You guys know the story. You guys have all seen like Prince of Egypt. Actually, that movie's really old now, huh? Because that came out when I was in college. So like some of you, that's like an ancient movie. I remember it came out. I saw it in the theater. You guys are all laughing at me. But anyway, so Moses, right? It talks about how his parents had faith in not listening to the edict of the Pharaoh and killing their son, right? And how they just put him in this wicker basket, just pass him down the Nile, and he's rescued by the daughter of Pharaoh. And he lives most of his adult life as a prince. Right? So then, he becomes like super Jew, And he's all like fighting for his people, and he kills an Egyptian, and he runs off. And then he becomes like a shepherd. So he goes from being basically the king of the world to just being outside, hanging out with the animals. You know, shepherd comes up in the Bible all the time, and it's kind of almost in many ways seen as this just like this figure of like leadership and all these things. Yeah, even in Korea, like, you know, when we talk about small groups, like what 목장 is like, what, that's literally shepherd, right? Is that right? It's like, yeah, flock, but like you're a shepherd, you're like, yeah, anyway, regardless. My Korean's terrible. But like, there's that, like, oftentimes we elevate that thought of what a shepherd is, but they weren't seen as high figures. Like, basically that was the job for the uneducated. Especially like you look at the New Testament times, all the shepherds are looked down upon because these fools are dirty. Like, you know, they literally smell like they're sheep because they're around sheep all the time. Actually, we did, what was this? I was with the pastors, and we took a trip out somewhere in the Shibor. And there was like a place where like you could, like, there were a bunch of sheep, and you could, like, you know, I guess feed them and take pictures with them. And I was like, I'm gonna stay in the bus. Those things are nasty. Like, you know, you look at sheep, and like you have this image of like this pure white. And, like, they're not white, they're gray. Okay? They smell, and like, you know, like, and they're like the dumbest animals in the world. And so they need someone to take care of them. And this is what Moses was. He was a shepherd. He went from being a prince to this dude hanging out with sheep out in the wilderness. How long was he a shepherd for? How many years? You guys know? 40 years. So he goes from a lifetime of being royalty to another lifetime of hanging out with animals out in the wilderness. And it took 40 years before God called him in the burning bush and said, lead my people, bring them out of Egypt. And so again, if you haven't seen the theme, one of the most consistent things that happens in all of these models of faith is time. Not just like a month, 6 months, a year. We're talking long periods of time. Rahab. Now this is actually a very interesting story because it's really just one thing she does. And you know, Rahab, it always says Rahab the prostitute. So the Bible likes to make it clear you know who she is. It says Rahab the prostitute. And she's from Jericho. She is part of the races that are enemies of Israel. And what happens is these spies come in, and she decides to hide them and to risk her own life, her own family's life, for these random Israelites. But she tells them, I'm doing this because I believe in your God. I have seen and heard what he can do. So her faith is ridiculous. Like, this is a woman that is not even a Jew, that has heard and seen and believes in this God of theirs. So much so that she risks her own life for them. And what does God do? God saves her and her family. And not only that, she's part of the genealogy of Jesus. Right? And as we went over the story of Ruth, she's actually the mother of Boaz. Right? Her son marries, marries Ruth, and then from him eventually comes King David. So it's interesting because you look at the genealogy of Jesus, there are very few women, and not only that, there are only 2 foreign women, her and Ruth. And so here we see, in one act of faith, a complete transformation. She changes the destiny of her entire family. Not only that, she becomes part of something even greater. Even though the Bible makes it clear she's Rahab the prostitute, she redeems her entire life in one action. And I love how verse 38, in the conclusion, when it's talking about all these different people and all the different sufferings that they've gone through, how they're living in all these difficulties. It's talking about how they're like living in caves and like hole in the ground. It's like, wow. Like when I think of hole in the ground, I think of like when they found Saddam Hussein, like basically in a hole in the ground. You guys remember that? It was like the most like sad thing. Like, I grew up, during the Gulf War. And so I thought of him as this like military dictator, and then at the end of his life they just literally found him in a hole in the ground, right? But the passage kind of comes to a close and says the world was not worthy of them. Even though they've gone through all this suffering, even though they've gone through all this difficulty, the world was not worthy of them. And then it concludes and says, God could have given them their promises immediately. He could have answered what they wanted and given it to them, could have given them the instant gratification, but God, as the passage says in verse 40, He had something better. He had something better planned. God could have rewarded each and every one of these individuals for their faithfulness and just left it at that, but God had a bigger plan that would allow all of us to be involved. So that's how they ended up living those lives of faith. And so what I want us to remember is that when we live lives of faith, the hardships that we go through, they're not wasted. Nothing is in vain when it comes to God. And so for some of us, as I've been conversing with many of you, one of the struggles is, what if God is not giving me what I want right now? Right? And as I said before, the number one question people ever ask me as a pastor is, what is God's will for me? What does God want me to do in my life? And, I have to give them the same answer. I'm like, just improve your relationship with God and you will know. But what I also want to say is, when we look back at all these different models that I've gone over very quickly, none of them ever got anything quickly. Right? You're talking like 25 years waiting for a son, 40 years living as a shepherd. None of them got anything quickly. But at the end of the day, God used those seasons of difficulty to prepare them for something greater. That 25 years of waiting for Abraham helped him to prepare for what was to come. Those 40 years as a shepherd, as meaningless as it might have seemed, was preparing Moses to become one of the greatest leaders of all time. When you actually look at the numbers of the nation of Israel, when they came out of Egypt, it's something like 700,000 men. The Bible didn't record women and children. So realistically speaking, the Israelites that came out of Egypt was probably around at least 2 million people. That's a lot of people to lead, right? It's kind of interesting because going into Egypt, it was only 70 people, and then 400 years later, it's like 2 million. So they're definitely having lots of babies. but basically, like, to be able to lead that many people, you have to be phenomenal. And God trained them with sheep. Right? So brothers and sisters, what I want to encourage you is, like, some of you might be in a season where nothing is working out the way you think, and you're being challenged to live a life of faith, where you're like, God, I thought it was going to be this. I thought you had given me a promise for this. I thought this was how things were supposed to turn out. And it's not working out that way. So maybe you're going through a difficult season. Maybe you're going through a season of fruitlessness. Maybe you're going through seasons where you're questioning God at every single turn. But what I want to encourage you today is, faith is not about instant gratification. Right? God is not a microwave God. Right? He's not going to give you your food in seconds. He likes to make slow food. He likes to cook it just right. Brothers and sisters, a lot of times that takes time. Now, at the same time, sometimes God does give you something immediately. That does happen. And so the question is, how do you respond? When God answers you and gives you exactly what you want, right when you want it, how do you respond? When God says, wait, how do you respond? That is faith, brothers and sisters. It's responding to God knowing that He will fulfill His promises. So the challenge today, and we'll go again, we're not meeting next week, but 2 weeks from now, we're going to look at more modern heroes of faith. People that have, and especially more in the context of Korea, more in the context of, even now. And I want us to really dwell upon these things. So, I encourage you, look at Hebrews 11, look at these different characters, go back to their passages, learn more about them, and learn from those that have walked before us. See the struggles that they've had, and see how they've responded, and be encouraged to do likewise. This is the Hall of Faith, and it's my firm belief that many of you can live similar lives if you really fix your eyes on God, and you know that He keeps His promises. Let's just want to pray. I want you to just first take a moment to ask God to help you to live a life of faith. And so if there's anything on your heart right now that is hindering you from doing any questions, any discouragements, any challenges that you're facing right now, I want you to pray to God, help me to act in faith even in spite of these things. So let's take a moment to pray and see what our hindrances are. Pray that God would allow us to persevere in faith. Let's pray. Of this chapter of Hebrews 11, ask just God to reveal the many role models He's placed in your life, whether it's your parents, whether it's people that have influenced you in the past. Just take a moment to ask God to show you models of faith, models of people who have lived it out, and then as you look upon that you would be encouraged to do likewise. So let's take a moment to just ask God to reveal the role models that He's placed throughout our lives. Father, we thank you, Lord. We thank you that you are a God who keeps his promises. That we can truly place our hope and trust in you. We thank you for these many heroes of faith, many role models, Lord, that you've placed in our lives, Lord. But help us to remember first and foremost, Lord, that this isn't on us. It's not about our own abilities. It's not about us. But it's all about trusting you. And so help us, Lord, to live and act in faith, knowing that you are a good and great God. And knowing that even in times of difficulty, even in times where it seems like you're not even there, Lord, you never give up on us. So help us, Lord, to respond in faith to difficulties, to joys, to victories, to whatever it is, and whatever happens in our lives, may we respond in faith. We thank you, Father.